Welcome to Mommy Has Questions. Motherhood is hard, but it's even harder when the system is stacked against us. We're four moms who have come together from the big city and the suburbs to call out societal norms that make being a woman feel like a struggle every day, and to spark the change we all need. If you're tired of feeling unsupported and you've got questions, you're not alone. This is your village. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Mommy Has Questions Season 2. My name is Cristina and Tiffany. I'm a public health professional, currently stay-at-home mom, full-time primary caregiver of my 3 young children living in the suburbs of the South. And today we've got a very exciting episode, which is actually a follow-up from our last episode. So if you have not listened to that yet, go back and listen to episode 2 of season 2. And I'll give you a quick recap before we jump in with our exciting lineup for today. So what we talked about last week, what my big question was what do young men in America actually need today? We discussed this topic as related to the context of the current crisis for men ages 18 to 34. We're talking about loneliness epidemic, red pill manosphere pipeline, all of that type of stuff. And we discussed it in the context of a Scott Galloway podcast episode, which featured Jonathan Haidt and Richard Reeves, where they discussed this crisis and really concluded that moms have actually raised the alarm for something to be done. And this issue has been recognized across party lines, but we still need to answer that question of why are these young men and boys being left behind and what do they need to come out of it? And without further ado, we have a very, very special guest today joining us at, among other things, HQ. And today we are joined by Matthew Groff. Hey, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. We're so excited. And Matt is actually a stay-at-home father and full-time caregiver, as well as a short story writer, literary critic, and blogger. And you might be surprised because we are joined by a man today, and we're a podcast of moms. So you might be wondering, why is this happening? Well, he's an incredible parent who also shares this perspective of primary caregiver. Also, Matt and Tiffany go way back.
Yeah, how long have we known each other? Since 93?
I like to say, because then people know how old I am. So let's just say high school.
High school theater.
High school theater?
Yeah, let's go with that. We had theater classes together.
We had theater classes together. We did To Kill a Mockingbird.
It was both of our ambition to move to New York City.
That's correct.
So there's many things that we bonded over.
That's right. Yes. And then he ended up marrying my very best girlfriend.
Oddly enough.
They have a beautiful daughter together.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all very good friends. In fact, we're going to be spending.
Awesome. So excited to have you give your incredible, unique perspective, Matt, on all of these questions that we have. But we do want to clarify that we are not asking you to represent all men. We're asking you this question as an individual because we also don't represent all women or all moms, but you have a very, very special perspective and we want to hear from you. So what do you feel that you need as a man and a father in today's America?
The most basic thing that I need is just to be able to be the father that I am. I think as a stay-at-home dad and a stay-at-home parent, people are not sure what the expectations are for a male caregiver. I think there's always kind of a misconception, or not misconception, but people aren't sure how to approach me about it. Do I talk to you about laundry? Or do I talk to you about sports? They're not sure necessarily what my angle at parenting is. And I also feel like they're not sure how male I am, I think is kind of the other question. Like when it comes to talking, like my wife, when other mothers talk about, there's, it's an easy conversation to start. It's easy to start talking about children and school and bedtimes and issues that everyone's going through. I think when it comes to me, they're not sure how much my level of involvement is. And I think that kind of goes back to the gender role that, somehow women care more about the specifics and the details of caregiving. And that's something that men are still uncomfortable with. So that's what I encounter. I am raising my children with the intention of doing the best job possible and not to feel that like I'm a square peg in a round hole when it comes to being a stay-at-home dad. I'm trying to make it work.
And actually, I would love to go back a little bit in your story to understand like how you came to be the primary caregiver for your family.
Yeah, it's interesting in the sense, but I feel also kind of common because it all goes back to COVID. Before COVID, my wife, we were co-parenting. Everything we did together was as a team. We split up responsibilities. Maybe shopping was the only thing that I did that she didn't do. But outside of that, it was always a partnership. Once COVID came around and I lost my job, and my wife ended up getting a very good job and promoted at her job, I was really the only one that could take care of making sure our daughter was in kindergarten at the time, but, having to do the online classes and then, keeping everybody healthy. So it was kind of a default feature. And it was something that we always kind of thought was going to be temporary. At some point, COVID would lift and we would go back to the way it was. But as my wife's career began to take off and she also started pursuing getting her CPA, the agreement that we had before just couldn't work, such as there was such a demand on her time. And so we basically sat down and we had another conversation about it. Like, well, what would work for our family? And this is the conclusion we came to, is I would just be the stay-at-home parent and take care of the house and the family. And it was an interesting journey because I would say it took me about 2 years to get comfortable with it. I think there was still a lot of, I wasn't sure what my purpose was. I wasn't sure if I was really fulfilling my role as a father within the family. When we were in the middle of COVID, it really wasn't something that we spent a lot of time thinking about because it was like damage control. We were just trying to stay afloat. Everybody has their own COVID experience. For us, we felt like it was the end of the world. So we were just trying to keep our head above water and kind of doing whatever we could. And I mean, we were very fortunate. Every time we came to a financial crossroads, my wonderfully brilliant wife would always get a promotion and would always get a raise. So when we hit those financial thresholds, something happened at her job that kind of eliminated that issue. But at the same time, it was a balancing act because I took on so much at the beginning. I didn't take any time for myself because, again, part of it was trying to figure out what my purpose and what my role was. I threw myself into it. And then, and then there's a downside. And I know you have spoke about this because I've listened to the podcast before about how mothering and being a caregiver can become all consuming and you don't have any time for yourself. So that was kind of a mistake that I made. So it was like, I did everything. I did play dates. I went to the park. I did doctor visits because that's what I did. And I didn't take any time for myself. So that idea of how much it cost, I paid for it. I mean, in a sense, I gave everything I had to do that. And it really wasn't until about 2 years when I began to feel what my role really was and how to do this correctly that I started to take time for myself. That there were things that I needed to accomplish outside of being a caregiver, outside of being a husband, outside of being a father. I had to do things. I did things before. I needed to continue to do things.
Absolutely can relate. It's fascinating to know that that was your experience as well. How did you feel about your sense of identity, your sense of self as you took on that role? How did it change? How did you come to potentially a new identity?
As I've thought about this and I've written about this, I mean, the COVID years was damage control. Like, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to keep the family afloat. And then when we had the discussion about what's our new direction, what's the new agreement we're going to have between myself and my wife, then that was the difficult period because it was like, well, I have this thing to do, but I don't feel like I'm providing the way I used to provide. That it felt like it wasn't enough work, I guess was the other thing. I didn't feel like I was working hard enough. And in my relationship, when it came to the financial end of things, we went through periods where sometimes I made the most money. And then we went through periods where sometimes she made the most money. So the financial aspect of one making more money than the other really wasn't an issue, but it was who had the most time to commit to things. And since I was supporting my wife to further her career and take care of our daughter, I felt like, well, I had to solve all problems. Like everything was my thing to do, to take care of. And then as I kind of moved into the last 2 years, I'm now comfortable talking about what I do because, again, it was something I was like, I'm not sure if I'm doing this correctly because I don't necessarily have a role model when it comes to this. I'm kind of in the weeds myself. I think when it comes to media and stay-at-home dads, you're either a doofus or you have an answer to everything. There's no real in between. The truth of the matter is that we exist in the middle. There's a gray area. Some days I have bad days, some days I have good days. But it is a difficult process to get through, to get to this other side where I feel I'm at now.
Wow. I think I just feel so validated right now.
I know.
Gender issue. This is literally just a caregiving issue. And it just so happens that caregiving has been conditioned to be such a part of being a woman that I think we call these women issues, but they're really just caregiving issues. And it turns out when you give it to a man, he also struggles. What a relief.
I mean this jokingly, and because my wife is wonderful and completely understanding, but she even made a joke one time to me that she makes all the money, so it's her money. And so we had that. So
Mm.
it's a joke. I had to have a conversation of like, we can't joke about that. This is a
Yeah.
team effort.
Mhm,
Not,
mhm.
not funny.
Not funny. And again, that was a joke, but it did lead to a conversation of if we're going to be a team, then we have to view it as a team. Even my daughter, who is better about this, but when I initially started doing it, she still referred to me as not having a job. Well, dad doesn't do anything. And so,
Oof.
my wife would step in and go, well, that's not true. And we were both making sure our daughter understood that there is a role that I am playing.
Mhm.
Mom does this, dad does that. And both of them are equally important for us as a family.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
sometimes I think it's harder.
Yes.
Like, I just want to
Yes.
say, like, it's so nice to go to a job where there's grown-ups and you get to have grown-up conversations and you don't have like a little one pulling at you and asking you 10,000 questions while you're trying to do 10,000 things.
Mhm.
And so I just want to say that for the record.
That is true. I sometimes do miss being around adults. It was fun coming over here today because I was in the morning rush hour, which I have not done in 5 years.
Mm.
If I'm up in the morning, I'm taking my kid to school. So it's usually with other parents and other kids. Being around adults who all look annoyed and don't want to be there
Mhm.
was a
That's
different.
right.
I haven't done that in a long time. Uh,
It's
one-
isolating, right? You don't interact with as many adults on a regular basis. I mean, for me, I know that's true. Like the reason we started this podcast, and I'm so grateful that we did, is because in the new stay-at-home mom role,
Mhm.
felt so isolated and just unable to kind of have the ability to express what I was feeling with other people. So I'm wondering if how you felt or have been feeling about this role of primary caregiver. And like you said, you haven't really had another role model as a primary caregiver who is a male as well. So maybe talking a little bit about that ability to have community and role models.
Well, I do feel like I'm in a special situation because my wife does work from home,
Mm.
so we're always together, um, which is fine, and we both enjoy. But there's rarely do I feel isolated where I don't have someone around to talk to. I have an issue with my day. My partner is always there to speak to about whatever the issue is, and vice versa. She has someone to speak to about her job as well. So we do have that dynamic. When it comes to community, I do. I mean, I hate to admit that social media does end up being an outlet.
Mhm.
In the theatrical world, I was a puppeteer. Is one of the performance things I did. So I have a lot of connections in the New York City puppeteer community. So I follow a lot of those guys, a lot of their shows. I try to kind of live vicariously through them, but also support them when I can through that. When it comes to other families and parents, I feel now that we're beginning to make friends with the parents of my daughter's friends.
Mhm.
And because coming out of COVID, everybody, I feel, was a little hesitant of being close to anyone else and inviting people into the house. And now we've kind of entered the realm of sleepovers and camps and things like that. Kids are spending more time at each other's apartment. So we do have that. So we're beginning to kind of make connections with other parents that way, which is good because it's usually I would say like the first 30 minutes when we're all together is talking about the kids. And then finally, we're done with that conversation. We can start talking about other things. Everybody wants to move on to start talking about adult things. It's just taxes and weather.
How- What's the reaction that you get being the primary caregiver? Like, do you get a lot of surprise or do you get a lot of people that are like, oh, yeah, I know a lot of male caregivers? Or...
Actually, I was talking to my wife about this morning before I came over. It is rather generational. When my daughter has a teacher that's relatively out of college, like early 20s, when I say I'm the stay-at-home father, I'm the primary caregiver, they don't blink an eye. And the conversation just keeps on going. They accept me for who I am. It's people that are older, 30 plus, that there's a twinge, like, oh, it's like that, like,
Mhm.
that's like, it's a white tiger. Look, it's
Right.
so rare.
Oh, what's that like?
Yeah, and it is, there usually is that feeling of, and I feel like with teachers especially that I've encountered, they're not sure how I'm going to react to bad news. I think when they have to inform me that your kid didn't do well on a test or she got in a fight or did something like that, I think that there's an understanding of how a mother would react to that. And there's not necessarily, well, how's the father going to react to these things? So I think that there are kind of concerns that I'm going to be out of the normal, I guess might be the best way to describe that. I think that does come into going back to gender norms. I think that a lot of us have been raised, Gen X people. This was something that was out of the ordinary. And if it was happening, it was because there was some sort of horrible tragedy. Then, because my wife was reminding me of Mr. Mom, but that's father losing his job and he's forced to do this. Not that he wants to do it. And I think when we encountered men that were stay-at-home fathers when we were growing up, it was because of that situation. Somebody's forced into this role, not that they want it.
It was out of necessity.
Exactly. And I think now there are more and more men that are definitely doing it because they want to do it. And I would put myself in that category. I enjoy doing this. I've gotten to that point where I like doing this. I do miss adults, I'm not going to lie, but I've come to a place now that this is enjoyable. I enjoy providing this for my family, and I accept and like my role in the family.
I remember when this was happening for you, and like you were like, yeah, I'm not going back to work. Like, I'm just going to be a dad. I'm going to stay at home. And I remember saying to you, like, well, how do you feel about that? And you looked at me like so sincerely and were like, I love it. I love it. I'm really good at it. I get it. Like, it's fun for me. And I was like, oh, because I had that bias. I was like, oh, got to give up your job and stay at home, huh? How's that going? You know what I mean? And you did not have that reaction. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because I was like, this is by choice, guys. He really loves this.
I had the realizations that I came to as being a stay-at-home parent is that I'm getting to spend this extra time with my kid. I get to spend a lot of time with my kid. And I said this to my wife, even if this goes terribly and we may be financially shooting ourselves in the foot by only having one income, but I'm never going to regret this. I'm never going to regret spending time with my kid.
Tiff, you know how we're all busy moms carrying a mental load that feels like 12 tabs open on Google? And then your kid does something so cute that you want to freeze it forever, not just as a photo, but actually capturing the moment.
I know exactly what you mean. And sometimes you want to capture more than just a photo. You want to capture what is truly happening in the moment and not forget the meaning behind the photo.
Well, now there's an app to do exactly that. Poppy is the beautifully designed photo app that lets you add voice notes to your photos so you can tell the story behind the smile in seconds.
Yep. Now you can capture the moments that matter effortlessly with Poppy, the voice note memory app for modern moms. Download on iOS or tap our show notes and use our promo code MommyHasPoppy for 3 months free at checkout.
Well, I actually do want to touch on that concept of financial stability, because that to me leads back to this discussion of why so many young men today find themselves at this crisis of not having that identity imposed by society as like the provider to the family unit in order to be considered a successful man. So part of what we discussed last week and what was discussed in that Scott Galloway podcast episode was the generational issue, which you kind of touched on too. The fact that like younger teachers are like, oh yeah, bro, no problem that you're a stay-at-home dad. Like that's not out of the norm. Whereas like the older generations are like, ooh, I don't know. That's totally different than what I'm used to. And I think what the backbone of that argument is it needs to be this generational push from the older generation, really giving the okay for there to be a different sense of what is defined as success as a man. So maybe if you could talk about your perspective on that a little bit, especially in the role of the primary caregiver.
I grew up in a normal, traditional Midwestern, living in Texas, straight as an arrow, white middle-class family. But one thing that I now appreciate and was different is that my father made a point of explaining to me, and I have 2 older brothers, that their marriage was a partnership. And it's definitely where I get that from. My dad he was always very adamant about not letting us as boys pick on mom. Now, my mom worked part-time. She was a nurse. And so she did all the mother things and still tried to have a career at the same time. And when speaking to my mom about this, when she got married, and this is like 1965, she was 19. She just got her nursing certificate. She was going to be a nurse, but then she decided to get married. And her expectation was that I'm going to give up my career or even the idea of having a career and become a stay-at-home mom and wife. And my father was against that for the mere sense of, well, this is really what you want to do with your life. Why don't you do it? And then we'll figure out the next thing. If you have kids and 9 months later they did, then we'll figure it out, And so, but my mom always appreciated that fact that my father was like, no, you don't have to do this. If there's something that you want to do, you should do it. So I grew up in that environment of always seeing a marriage as two people working together. It was never one having dominance over the other one. And I know for a guy in 1965, that was a different original way of thinking.
Very progressive of him, especially in the Midwest.
And to be honest with you, I have no idea where that came from and why he behaved that way. And I probably should ask him. And so I think for me, the way that as things have changed, my life has gone in many different directions. Marriage and raising children have also gone in many different directions I didn't foresee. But we have always had a goal that the family was most important. Us as a unit, as a marriage, as a couple, that's primary. We have to have a good relationship with each other. And that will lead us to making sure we raise a child well together. So I feel like I've escaped some of the pitfalls that Professor G was talking about because I've had two very important things, which is understanding that a marriage is a partnership, that you're working as a team, and choose your partner well. And
very
I think
important.
And two is purpose. What is your purpose that you're here to do? And what is funny is that it also reminds me of my grandmother's, my dad's mother, when she was older in retirement. She always said, I have to wake up every morning having a goal. There has to be something that I have to look forward to and I have to work towards, or there's no point. So, and again, as I have gotten older, and that has started really to ring true. When it gets to the crisis of young men, I'm a little hesitant to use the word crisis. Sometimes I do feel like it can be a little overblown. And the only reason why I say that is because men have been in crisis since the 50s. I was trying to pump my dad for some ideas and information before I came on here. I was talking to him on Monday. So I was asking him about growing up in the 50s and what was the terrible thing that everybody thought would destroy children. And it was TV. And he's not exactly baby boomer. He was born during the war. So he was the first wave of TV, and TV was going to rot everybody's brain, and it killed attention spans, and kids don't go outside and play. Kids, they don't read books anymore. All the things that, Gen X got dumped on them with rock music and smoking weed and MTV. And I feel like to a certain degree, it's the same scapegoat is being used to dump on young men, which is that, well, you're watching too much TV, you're listening to too much music, you're in social media. So this problem that men have had, I see has been something that's been going on for about 70 years. Now, I will concede that the facts that they brought forward are true. The suicide rate is much higher. The indebtedness, the overspending, all those things are completely true. And I do think that does lead into a very serious problem. I think the other thing that isn't taken into account is people do get married later. And I think for looking back at my father, who got married at 22, right out of college, my mom at 19, very quickly, they had a purpose, which was their marriage and their children. And again, my mom was, after 9 months of marriage, then she became pregnant. They had a very, very small amount of time to be a couple before children were introduced. So, when you have a kid, you need to take care of them. You need to have a job. You need to wake up in the morning. You got to make sure they're fed. That does give you purpose. So I think for young men that are, for whatever reason, are delaying marriage. Also, there's a lot of young men that do delay careers. Getting in, there's not necessarily, I feel like, a huge impetus or opportunity that used to be for people to go out to get jobs. And I think that does lead to what is my purpose? But the question of purpose, narratively is ancient, as the idea of where do I fit in the world? It's Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. The hero leaves the village because they're not sure what their purpose is and how they fit into the world. So I feel like that is a universal question that everybody asks. Social media, I think, does play a part in this as well, where you're constantly comparing yourself to somebody. And I think that is exceptionally detrimental. So I kind of feel like the men being in the state of purposelessness and what's with them, and are they going to snap out of it, I think has been a concern for a very long time. And I don't think anyone's really come up with an answer yet of how to solve this problem.
So my question is,
yes,
what about the fact that they're blaming it on women?
Great
Like,
question, Tiff.
I feel like that's
Yes.
different. Like there's an entire, we call it red pill content. There's a community, a huge community online. There's tons of these misogynistic influencers who are basically saying, hey guys, your problem is ladies and you need to be dominant over them and we need to stop educating them and they need to go back to the kitchen. And the problem is equality.
Mhm.
Any comments?
Oh, from my perspective, when you bring about change and make things better, and which I do feel things are becoming better, there's always going to be a pushback on some level. From a male point of view, from very early on, there is this idea that you are in charge to do things, and then you become adult, and you realize, no, you're really not in charge. You're in charge of anything. You think that you're going to be some sort of god, that you're going to lead people. You become an adult, you begin to realize, no, you're just a cog. You're one of, and it's hard to be heard and it's hard to be seen. Because I do feel like that is something that has put them in, like, if you're not leading, you're a follower and you've lost, which is detrimental. I think blaming women, which is wrong, obviously, is a scapegoat, because this is what's bringing about change. Having equality and a partnership is not a bad thing. It actually makes things better, in a sense of two people solving a problem is a lot better than one. Any successes that I've had in my marriage and in my career since I've been married and with raising a daughter it's been because of a partnership. The same thing when I look at my brothers and their wives, who are type A personalities, business leaders, executives. They don't take crap from anybody, but their marriages are partnerships, and they take raising their kids and their marriages very seriously. So I feel like that they have also took the lessons from my parents. But there's no intimidation there that they have wives that make way more money than they do, have way more successful careers than they do. That's not an issue. That is not a problem. That is something that is helping them accomplish all the goals that they want to accomplish. But I do think that when you have change, there's always a group of people that are afraid of change, and they will dig in and they will go after what seems to be the easiest target that's causing the problem. And I think that is why it's easy for these misogynistic influencers to go after young men, because young men are looking for a purpose. And it's easier to tell somebody there's nothing wrong with you, it's the other guy. And it just happens in the situation to be a woman.
Yeah, the blame game is just always an easier out.
Yeah, I mean,
than having to take responsibility for your own life.
Exactly. The best jobs I've ever had in my life, my boss has always been a woman. I think the most influential person in my professional career was a woman. Clear on what the expectation was from me working for them. They were respectful. It's a lot better than some of the men that I worked for. But yeah, and they did a masterful job of making sure that everybody worked up to their potential and felt valued. I mean, what you would want from any boss. Is that so that's something that I also think in my mind that, like, I know this is crap, because in my experience, again, and these are lessons that I take when I was in arts administration. I would think back working for them and what they showed me and what I need to take to the job to motivate people to get them to do the work I need them to do.
Interesting, because there is a statistic that women typically make better leaders because of emotional intelligence. And I think that that's a lot of what you're speaking to. I want to ask you about masculinity.
Okay.
We talk a lot on this podcast about femininity versus masculinity. And one of the thoughts that we have come to that I keep kicking around in my head, because I think it's really interesting, is that femininity is often defined by our ability to have a child. So it's like we're soft and we're nurturing and we're natural caregivers because we're able to grow a human in our bodies. Masculinity, it seems, has been defined by being opposite to femininity. And as feminine qualities have become celebrated and empowered through feminism, and we have been thought of now as to be equal to men, there has been a sort of crisis in defining masculinity, because if femininity doesn't mean you're weak, then what does that mean for masculinity? Because masculinity seems to have been defined as the opposite of femininity. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that concept.
Yeah, I do.
And it's okay if your thought is that's all bull crap.
And part of it is bullcrap, but part of it is also, I feel, is the idea that's put in the men's head of what a man is. And it's perpetuated by other men as well. A history professor back in college, and used Vikings as an example. And it's like Viking men, and swords and bare chested and, invaded countries and pillaged, and they were the manliest of men. I was like, that's what men are, right? And of course, in the classroom, this is like, late 90s, all the guys were like, yeah. He was like, you do realize that was really only 5% of the Viking male population. The other 95% were the guys building the boats and making the sails and doing the artwork and making the jewelry and farming and raising the goats.
Nobody talks about raising the goats.
No.
I got to tell you, they leave that part out.
Exactly. Because the warrior group of people that everybody assumes was Vikings was a small part of the population. And he put it in the sense of like, somebody that is okay to take a weapon and look somebody in the eye and kill them is crazy. And you want them on your side, but you don't want them raising children. It's like, they have a role to play. This is their role. And he was like, there were all these other people. They were the men that made, that came up with the idea of law and other things within a society. So he's like, there's always been strata to men. Men fit in different roles within society, and they've done different things. So the idea that there's this warrior ethos, that every man out there was a warrior, which also is not true. And most of the men that were the warriors out there ended up getting killed. We're descendants of the people that didn't get killed and weaseled out of it. So to begin with, there's a misconception of like all men were this one thing. I'm trying to remember exactly what Professor G said in his podcast, that men are aggressive and risk-taking. I know to a degree, sure, but I have to say, well, not everybody's aggressive. Risk-taking, possibly. I could kind of agree with that. But even as he was trying to describe all men, I think you're also kind of like, not all men do that. And masculinity isn't always being aggressive. Protecting is something that is very masculine. And I understand there's a physical aspect that most men would still look at. I physically need to protect people. But, we don't live in a society where we have to fight to survive like we used to 100,000 years ago. So that may be ingrained into the male brain of I need to be protective. But as things progress, that needs to be channeled into a way that functions well in society. Not everybody's a sociopath that wants to kill people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other.
Thank goodness.
And I also understand that this is where the patriarchy comes out of this, of men beginning to have strata and positions within society. And then they can, then they begin to dominate the society. So there's a downside to the strata, which I fully admit as well. But I think that's where men kind of make the mistake, is like, we were all this one thing at one time. No, we weren't. We definitely were not that.
Yeah, it's the same with women, right? Yeah. We pigeonhole and with these tropes and these stereotypes,
right.
And we have this all or nothing thinking, like you have to be all this way and none of that way. And it just isn't true, because women, as they know now, were also hunters just as much as men.
Right.
And they were running around with spears, killing animals and doing manly things. Just as you were, some men were writers.
Or figuring out math.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, Pythagoras sat in a cave and he figured out geometry. That was not a guy that was out there killing people. He was thinking things. But no one would ever question his masculinity or his worth within a society now. But again,
that is a fascinating concept to think about that. Like, and what I go back to a lot is I do think that today this problem is so exacerbated because we have social media giving this perception, Matt, like you said, that there's just one strata that men have to aspire to, and that is the hyper masculine Viking. That is the only thing that you should aspire to achieve if you're really truly going to be a real man. And obviously we're in the period of time where the current administration is really, really pushing that narrative. And I personally feel like that is exacerbating this harm. So what do men need in order to understand that this is actually not the only thing that you can aspire to be?
From my perspective, and I think Tiff, you would understand this, us growing up together. I mean, storytelling is kind of the realm I exist in through theater and writing and books and all those other things. To me, I think the most important thing is to start putting forth those stories and characters that exemplify that. We know it exists. We have to show the nuance in stories that depict that. I think Ted Lasso was one of the shows I think did a good job.
I love Ted Lasso so much. Shout out to Ted Lasso.
Right, but I think it was the show that did a good job of showing men being vulnerable and listening to each other and talking through things without anyone seeming less than masculine. It had to do with a sports team, sports. It's a good vehicle to tell that story about men sharing and being open. I think that there should be more stories about that. It's like right now, stay-at-home dads are either like Homer Simpson or leave it to be their father knows best. There's no in between. And I think the stories should be told of the difficulty of being a stay-at-home father. But what is that dynamic in a family where there is a non-traditional parent staying at home? You put that idea out there, you create role models, or if nothing else, to just start having the discussion of the fact, well, what is this like? Is this a realistic depiction? Because I think that in it, putting those characters and those ideas and the stories out and social media or whatever, again, it starts that process of, well, how do we digest this in society? Is this what we want? Is this accurate? I think has to happen. It doesn't help when you have people that are very sexist that are running organizations in the government. But at the same time, I think that when you see people exemplifying couples, other husbands, families, then you need to point out and celebrate that, say, look, there's a good example of this. This does work. This is functional within society, and celebrate it as well.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I think we know what your next short story should be.
Absolutely.
Really, you're 100% right. These stories are so important. That's exactly why we wanted to have you on, and we wanted to shine a light on your role as primary caregiver, because it is rare. And the fact that you love it and that you embrace it, and I want to attest, because I've seen Matt as a dad now for many years, and he's a fantastic dad, and his daughter is so much fun and such a delight to be around, and that's a big testament to both of her parents.
The big thing I think we left with last week was like, we need the older generation to provide permission for the younger generation to achieve a different narrative that doesn't have to be that traditional hypermasculine provider, protector. Matt, you are a perfect role model for these young men, and I hope we can continue sharing your story. Actually, like, truly, we want to share your story because we need more male role models like you who exhibit this ability to say, like, I have this amazing equitable partnership. I respect my wife and other women, and in leadership roles too. Like, that is so important when we are so appreciative of you, and hope that you can continue sharing your story, and hope we can elevate your story for other men out there to continue acting as amazing allies and role models.
Cool.
Yeah, I think male allyship is something we talk about a lot, and it's been so nice to actually have a male ally on this podcast. So we've been discussing it a lot. Male allyship is so important. And for all the men out there, if you're wondering how you can protect and provide, be an ally to women, that's an excellent modern way to protect and provide for us.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, again, thank you so much. Hope we can have you back at some point to be our male ally consultant.
Fun. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm more than happy to talk about all these things.
And you can check out Matt's blog in the show notes.
And as always,
continuing the conversation is part of the solution.
Yay.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Cristina.
Thanks, guys.
Glad I could help. I'm very happy to help.
Yes, you did.
Mommy Has Questions is brought to you by, among other things, a vibrant moms collective that provides in-person programming and online content. For more information, please visit momsamongotherthings.com. This episode was produced by Cristina Sansone and directed by Tiffany Hodges, with theme music by Juan Carlos Enriquez. Hit subscribe to catch our next episode, and rate and review us to let others join our village.